Hi, and welcome to the Voice of Bold Business Radio. I am your host, Jess Dewell of Red Direction. I know you want to know how to stay in touch with the show between our programs. So the must have right now is the hashtag. Hashtag VBB for the Voice of Bold Business Radio. Hash VBB Radio. And that's how you can stay in touch with us between programs and share your comments and thoughts across social media, in addition to leaving them on the website, at your iTunes review, and maybe even on YouTube. Wherever you happen to be listening is where we want your feedback. I'm going to tell you, the ability to listen is underutilized. Whether in sales, negotiation, marketing, even with our kids, I'm a big proponent of using personal relationships to practice this stuff. The thing is, with our kids and our loved ones, they already know all of our warts. So it might be more of a challenge, but it's also a little safer to be able to understand that the things we say impact how they respond to us, the people around us. And when we listen first, when we think first, when we choose to set our emotion aside first, there's so much more we can learn and be able to proceed in our conversations with purpose. In fact, did I write this down? I did. You will hear a really cool phrase that Ralph Young, whom I will introduce to you in just a second, uses, and I really like it. It's called, what did he say? He said, the purpose of a pause. So listen for that, plus so many other nuggets when we come back. And I want to introduce you now to Ralph, because he's going to be sharing all kinds of secrets and information with us that when we stop and we look at it, we can put to use right now. Ralph Young is known as the word of mouth master. Ralph works with individual professionals and organizations to develop a unique follow-up communication and negotiation skill set that will plant the individual and the organization in the top of minds of clients, colleagues, and customers. He's been in the trenches and he's been on the front line. Practiced in behavioral sciences, Ralph is a practitioner of neuro-linguistic communications, subliminal persuasive linguistics, and unconscious suggestions. He uses these skills to teach business professionals how to create conscious and subconscious rapport with anyone and develop their persuasion tactics to achieve further success. I'll be right back with Ralph after this.
Welcome to the Voice of Bold Business, the show that provides everything smart leaders need to evaluate situations, build relationships, and create solutions. Jessica Dewell candidly talks about the skills necessary to build tenacity and do more with less. And now, here's Jessica.
You and I both know how important language is, and how we use it is also really important. I want to know for you and for our viewers and listeners, what is the most important part of language from the area of study that you work in?
Well, I think the most important part of language is being aware of the now, understanding that emotions and behaviors play a role in every form of dialogue. So I think that it starts with self-speak, personally, the words that we say to ourselves to drive a point. Take example, just the simple language that, I've never been very good at those things, or I can't do that. You're actually helping your brain accomplish just that. Take the statement literally and not help you do what you can do, what it has the facilities and the tools to do, but it won't help you. Using a negative connotation as a personal reference only tells the brain to do it. For example, I'm not going to do that again. And you're in essence telling your automatic functions inside your subconscious to go do that again. Let me help you do it.
Okay, they talk about this in relationship to parenting a lot. And people seem to forget. This is actually something that I proactively do. And I get people who look at me weird when I walk down the street. My son might be jumping out into the road. And I don't say, get out of, or don't go in the road. I say, get out of the road. right? Because of exactly what you were thinking. And I actually can relate that back to business situations and miscommunications that have occurred, not only between a company and the clients, but also internal communications between people on the same team as we're filtering out that negative word and just hearing the do this thing, even though there was a negative in front of it that meant don't do this thing. So how do we start to unlearn using not and don't so that we can actually practice this proactive, more positive form of communication just in our daily lives?
Well, that's a very good question. Realistically, it's all about awareness. When we become aware of the things that we're saying that are not serving our best interests, we can tend to adjust because the awareness gives us some perspective of something that we may or may not be doing that's serving our best interests. Without awareness, our brains will just take over and say what they know how to say. Remember, the brain has been learning since infancy. It's been learning things that the conscious mind is totally unaware of, but capable of utilizing, because the subconscious mind knows what tools, what words, what experiences to bring forth in any given context it's experienced anything close to. So the more the brain knows about a scenario, the more it can operate on an automatic function. Take the hardware or the hardwired functions of our mechanics in every day. If you decide that you have a thought that you want to drink from a cold drink from the fridge, it's your subconscious brain that picks you up, puts you on your feet, walks you to the refrigerator and opens the door before your conscious mind has to even come back to think about choice. What drink do I want? When we start to realize that our subconscious mind drives 100% of our activities out inside in the real world, it's our conscious mind that only gives it an instruction. Take, for example, the grasp of a stapler right here. I pick up a stapler. Well, my brain, my subconscious brain picked up the stapler. It knew to move my arm, my hand, the dexterity, mobility, pressure. To do that, I didn't have to think about any of those elements. As we start to get into communication and communicating with others, we're not thinking about the undue elements of our words or our tonality or inflection that our brain has the amazing ability to interpret by itself and to react by itself. So negative word speak is the first thing that we have to look at by being aware that we utilize it without consciousness. And we have to become aware that we did, in fact, utilize it and find new words to frame ourselves towards a positive outcome. Instead of the example, I'm not going to do that again, let's take a more proactive terminology and place it in our brain that let's do something different. Just that thought process gives the brain the ability to look for different solutions rather than not look for solutions, such as I'm not going to do that again. Does that make sense?
It makes complete sense. And it reminds me of when you might see a car, and people do this all the time, and they tell me about it. I never see such and such a car on the road. And now I went out and bought one because I liked it so much. And I can't believe now that everybody's driving my exact same car. That's the same type of awareness. We're choosing to notice, and something is in our consciousness so that we're recognizing it more often. And just what I hear you saying, the simple act of noticing, and some of us might have to write it down. I said the word not, don't, can't. And just noticing the action of recognizing it and bringing it to our conscious awareness gives us the ability to choose to change it.
Well, yes, but you see, recognition is all done and change is all done in the subconscious mind. It's not done consciously. Essentially, the brain has to be given well, let me back up a second.
Okay.
When we have two primary states of mind. We have receptivity or we have resistance. Resistance is seen in many forms of apprehension, anger, anxiety, stress, primarily emotionally driven. We can have good emotions, bad emotions, but these things will all play a role in how our brains interpret based on the emotion that it's exhibiting itself at the moment. So if I'm upset and I'm not receptive, no matter what information you give me, my brain's just going to discard it, just like the peripherals that I see on the side of the road while I'm driving down the highway. It's not important to see what's on both sides. It's only important to see what's on the road. So I literally filter and discard all of that information. So the brain works in the same fashion. It will discard anything it doesn't seem or deem appropriate. As we form our belief systems are the basis of how we react in life. They manifest behaviors and emotions that are tied to them based on prior experiences. And through this hodgepodge of interpretation and filtering, the brain can go any number of ways because, remember, it knows what to do and how to do it. It's stored. As you talk about these familiarities, or I see this car again and again, what you're really doing is you created a state of awareness, and now you're programming a state of knowledge inside your subconscious mind. Your subconscious mind now learned that you should be attentive to this vehicle because you like this vehicle. You have a vested interest in this vehicle. So it will now see it for you, just like it walks for you, it talks for you, it picks things up for you.
Oh, there's so many things I could just say right now.
Well, we open up the mind. We open up the mind when we start to realize how it actually works rather than the way people perceive it does. Most people from experience perceive it as a whole collective that works together. But the way I perceive it is it's two separate entities. The conscious mind, which is the manager, the overseer, the director, it gives instructions. The subconscious mind is your database. It contains every experience that it's ever stored, every memory, every emotion and behavior that it's ever manifested, and it decides which one of those tools to use in any given context once it's triggered.
Okay, so with the framework you've just put together, when we power through something, it sounds like that's just the hardest path we could possibly take. That there are going to be easier ways we can get to a finish line, a goal, when we take a step back and we actually understand how we're, in all reality, getting in our own way because we're using our tool, our brain, incorrectly.
Well, we're using it the way we patterned it, the way we programmed it. And so now it's a question of, do we really want to be aware of how it's getting in our way? And do we want to correct those things or adjust those things to make our lives simpler, better, more complete, with less resistance and anxiety? If the brain is in a receptive state, then the brain will take in information, integrate it into what it knows, discard what it doesn't agree with, and utilize the rest to allow change to take effect. Does that make sense?
It makes complete sense. Everybody, if you're listening, if you happen to be in the first camp where you don't want to know and you want to let things be as hard as they have always been and be as painful as they have always been, you can just shut it off now. Everybody else, we're going to continue forward and you're going to have some more information to grasp and really take a look at what we've got going on within ourselves so that we can be playing at a whole different level, because that's really what I hear you talking about, Ralph, is that when we take the time to know and we choose to examine and then acknowledge and become aware of what we have allowed to become programmed and that we have the ability to change that, the old rules really don't apply because we have a whole new set.
Yes, we now have a new tool, the tool of awareness and impact of how my brain says things. Take the basic example I use when someone is interrupted in the middle of a process. They're somewhat stressed because they're behind schedule, and an employee, an associate, what have you, pops in and says, "Hey, I need you for a minute." Now, that person can respond many different ways. He can respond by, "Hey, what do you need? How can I help you?" He can respond by, "What do you want?" Or, "Hey, what's going on?" Now, all of these things have nonverbal effects because the brain has learned nonverbal language before it ever learned words, and it still uses it as a core of interpretation. Tonality, inflection, body language, gestural language, the oohs and ahs that we used as babies, as children, before we had language, got us something, and that became a program pattern, and we used those until words replaced it. The challenge I see is that words replace things. Technology has overwhelmed people with information to a point where they no longer know how to communicate or even realize that they're not serving their best interests in their communication because they're allowing emotions to cloud judgment and direction of the words.
Okay, let's talk about emotion because that keeps coming up. And the fact that we do have this emotion, and to paraphrase some of what you said, it's through that emotion that our brain is deciding what to pay attention to or not in that moment. Are we going to be able to be receptive or not? So we're really talking, we're on the edges of emotional intelligence. And from your work and from your experience, what is emotional intelligence in a way that we could say, yes, we're already doing this, or this is a skill we can learn?
Well, emotional intelligence is just being aware of the fact that emotions cloud judgment. If you think about it as a filtering system, let's look at the conscious mind. The conscious mind can look down into the subconscious mind and see everything that's there, everything it's ever learned, all of the emotions and associated behaviors and beliefs surrounding those things. And it has basically access to the total toolkit. But when it gives an instruction, it gives a basic instruction. The basic instruction is, for example, I'm thirsty. The mechanism of the subconscious mind is to satisfy I'm thirsty, which means I have to pick myself up or I have to grasp a glass of fluid and I have to take a drink. All mechanics that are automatic. When we deal with words, the difference between what do you want and hey, what's going on? Well, do they sound different to you?
To me, the answer is, well, the inflection of your voice over this mechanism, no, they were the same. The words that you used to me had very different meaning, though.
Why? The words were basically the same. What do you want satisfies 100% of the purpose of the interruption. Hey, what's going on satisfies 100% of the purpose of the interruption.
Yes, and one stops.
It's tonality and inflection.
Invites.
No. It's nonverbal elements that are causing reaction or response.
So everybody, if I'm going to repeat in a different way what Ralph just said, my response to those two phrases is based off of my conditioning and my patterning, and your responses may be different.
Exactly correct.
I think that's important for us because the way I hear you speaking, Ralph, is that you're always looking at how we're talking to ourselves or others with a second perspective, the perspective of what else is happening around us and the perspective of what's happening in us in a way that we can observe ourselves, which means we actually have a third perspective. We have ourselves as an observer.
Well, that's one way of putting it, yes. You have to get to, realistically, the brain spends over 80% of its time in the past or the future, not the now. We don't listen any longer. We're too busy talking. We're too busy focused on our own agendas. And again, this is all driven from patterns that we've programmed into our subconsciouses that made us who we are. I look at someone turning around to me and saying, what do you want? Is a little terse, a little abrupt. Someone else might not feel that way. But what kind of reaction does a statement like that cause? And so what I'm looking at or talking about is looking forward. What kind of behavior would I like to manifest rather than what kind of behavior am I going to manifest through the words that I choose? What do you want to me sounds abrupt. Well, but realistically, most people will react a little taken back. They'll say, well, that was rude or terse, and how should I behave? I should get angry. I should get defensive. I should get something. Maybe I'll come back later because I feel I've done something wrong, when in fact the words didn't say that. The tonality and inflection did from the interpretation inside that individual's brain. Mm-hmm. Now, the individual did have two choices rather than allowing that program to take over and react. The first thing they could have done is expressed exactly why they came in with the same enthusiasm they had in the first place and not let the emotion take over the behavior and the reaction that followed. The second choice was to confirm the assumption the subconscious made, and that's to ask, well, hey, that was a little abrupt or a little terse. Was that your intention? Provided they say no, you've caught them in their own ignorance that they're saying things that don't serve their best interest, and they can now improve because you made them aware.
Aware of their ingrained habits.
Exactly correct. Nobody's saying it's wrong or right. It's just, it's ingrained, and it doesn't necessarily serve the purpose of the outcome.
I actually really like that you just brought up judgment, because it's something that every single one of us does. And we talked about it at the beginning when you were sharing this, how we speak to ourselves is a very good way. And we all end up being judgmental in some way towards ourselves, here or there or anywhere. And our ability to pick out when we are being judged by another person, our radar might be really tuned into that based off of our past experiences and what we choose to have allowed to become our patterns. So if I'm feeling or have a reaction, and I'm is kind of general to whomever is listening, of feeling judged, what is something that I can do to help myself get out of my own way so I can use my emotional intelligence and get my emotion to be like, yep, here you are, emotion, but I'm not going to let you cloud this up. I'm not going to let you mess this up for me. I really need to see what's going on here. What would be a step or two that somebody could take to start practicing to actively change that habit of being ruled by your emotion?
Well, there's two metaphors you've probably heard all your life. Do you know which metaphors they are?
You know what? I'm not even going to guess. Just tell us.
Take a deep breath before responding in anger. Okay, or count to 10 before you respond.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and what do most people do? They take a deep breath and they go, bam! Or they take 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Now I can release it. But the bottom line is that that's not the purpose of the pause. The purpose of the pause is to take a perspective of what emotion is now in control and what is the influence that that motion is going to drive. But most importantly, not my self-serving, what is that emotion going to invoke in the party surrounding me? And do I want that behavior and that emotion? Or do I want something else? See, this is where the biggest challenge, it's a crux of where do I go from here? I've always done it this way. My brain knows how to do it this way. I've let my brain do it because it knows how. Why should I bother, exerting myself to go further? But yet this is the threshold, because here is where I have to exert my conscious mind to say, no, I do not want to let this out. If I am too fuming, if I've got too much adrenaline, too much cortisol running through my brain, I have to step away from this. I need a remark that helps me get out of this before it becomes explosive. Like, well, hey, I just can't deal with this right now. I'm just out of control. I need a moment. Or I'm not prepared to deal with this at this time. Let's take a cooling off period. Now, that may invoke who knows what in other people, but it also may allow for that cooling off period. When someone is angry in your presence and you're the only person in the room, did you realize that you caused it, even though you had no agenda or intention of doing so, by something you said or did that has nothing to do with anything, but yet it did, in fact, hit a trigger point and fired off the reaction that's programmed to that trigger within that individual?
Oh, okay. So there are points on my path in life, and you may have had similar experiences. And if you would love to share one, we would love to hear one. For example, for me, there are very clear moments in time once I became aware of things that I did that caused some reaction, or I became aware of something somebody else did that caused me to react. When I have finally been able to go, oh, now that it's all over, shoot, what did I do? That was the first step. The second step for me ended up being, oh, I'm in the middle of this. I caused a minefield, or I'm in the minefield and I'm reacting and I have no control. To a next step of evolution of going, oh, here's where the minefield is. I can go in it. I can avoid it. And it can be a really long process. Yet there are time and time again when I have found myself in situations like, I don't even understand what I'm doing, but it's got to be me, because it's always the same. And I always end up with this mess left over and this not feel goodness, and being able to just recognize that there are some steps and then go, oh, so that's what I did. And now I'm here and there's nothing I can do about it. And then being able to go, oh, I have the choice to go here and make a mess or not.
Well, there's only really one way to find out how you project yourself out in the real world.
Is that to do it?
Well, the choice is yours. It's not a difficult challenge. It's a difficult follow-up process.
Okay.
But it's not, I won't even say difficult. It's different. And, many people get conquered by fear. But just record yourself in a conversation with anybody, whether it's a spouse, a child, whether it's regular dialogue, friend, clients, peer, doesn't matter. Record yourself with an abundance of different people. Take 5 or 10 minute recording segments without telling anybody you're recording, because you're only using it for self-improvement, not for any other purpose. And in essence, when you play the recording back, you have to do it in solace, complete quiet, no interruptions whatsoever. And the first thing your brain is going to do is it's going to hear you speaking, and it's going to start to critique you. Well, that'll give you a certain degree of awareness, but that's the norm. And I don't want you to look at or listen to it through your ears, but instead, I'd like you to listen to your voice talking to you. This person is talking to you, and I don't even want you to listen to the words so much. I want you to listen to how this person is making you feel at the end of each sentence. How did that sentence feel? Did it take me back? Did it engage me? What did it do to me as a recipient of that voice, of that information? What tonal inflections, what senses did I feel about that conversation? Was it comfortable and engaging? Was it unsettling and disruptive? What emotions were I putting out there? And that will give you a better understanding of how you project, because you're totally unaware of how you do most of the time.
You are listening to the Voice of Bold Business Radio. This is Program 97, the language of listening. And Ralph just shared with us a practical, useful, immediately actionable, step-by-step process that we can take a look, a good hard, actually it's a listen, isn't it? A good hard listen to ourselves to see the language that we're using. And what I hear you talking about, Ralph, is being a critique of ourselves and going through that process because there's something that we want to change. We want to get a different reaction. We want to be more connected. We want something. And can you, if we don't know what we want, but we want a change, can you give us like that light at the end of the tunnel of what a practice like this allows us to do within our own bodies as we're showing up?
Well, the first thing we have to do is understand the value of a question and what a question really is. For example, I've polled over the past several years about 10,000 people on one question. And let's see if you can come up with the right answer. The question is, What is the answer to the unasked question? The question you never ask, what's the answer?
Well, there is no answer because I never asked the question.
Yes, there is. There's an absolute answer. What is it? Come on, you know.
I'm sure I know, but you put me on the spot and now I have to think about this. So
no, you don't.
I don't?
The answer is no.
Wait, say the whole thing again. The answer is no. My brain went into but I should know this, but I should know this, but I should know this.
Well, the answer to the unasked question, the question you don't ask, let's give a hypothesis.
Let's do it.
Okay. I have something I want desperately. I walk into a room that 10 people are in that room and every single one can give me what I want. They all have the capacity and the willingness. But I never ask them for it. I walk out. What did I accept?
Okay. Thank you. Saying it that way was much easier for me to get into my brain. I settled for nothing because I kept my mouth closed.
Exactly correct. So we must ask the question if we want an answer. But then the next point is, how does the question come out and what does the question disclose and what does it create? So what does it disclose? Does it disclose the information I want? What does it create? Does it create the engagement I desire? Or does it create something else? Does it create a resistance or an apprehension or bring up a past experience that was negative? How does my question to someone get perceived and reacted or responded to. You talked earlier about looking to get a different reaction. I look for reaction because I think reaction is a negative term. I think of it as an automatic function without thought. I look for response.
I would agree with that. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. And when we get reaction, that is what we're getting. We're getting somebody else's automated program running in the background that's doing something in our presence, perhaps for or perhaps against our better interests. But nonetheless, we're invoking those things. What we put out is a direct reflection of what we get back. So whatever comes back to us is, in essence, a direct reflection of what we put out, whether we realize we put it out or not. Go right ahead.
So I'm going to tie this back to something that you said just before we took the station break, which is that when we're getting some reaction, and we weren't expecting any reaction and we had no intention, either we don't know we did, we've conditioned ourselves not to see it. There could even be an element of, well, regardless, it comes down to the fact we are doing it because we are getting that reaction. Because if what I hear you saying is another person is a mirror for ourselves.
Yes.
And in that connection that we all have, we can use that mirror for ourselves. Okay, now I have a different question. I'm not even going to finish that thought. I just want to go here. Well, what if there's like every way you look at it, and I've been in these situations once or twice where no matter what I say, the reaction or the response, sometimes, and I'll separate them out because they're both the same. They're both like, well, what was that all about? I don't even understand. What was that all about? And sometimes I feel like when I find myself in those situations, it's, are you sure you want to continue down this path? And noticing that thing no longer serves you, and then it goes away, compared to something that's new that you're like, oh, okay, that's a reaction from somebody else or a response from somebody else I was not looking for. And I've never encountered that before, or I encounter that infrequently. Maybe I should take a look a little closer.
Well,
I would say there are two parts of that might be coming into play here. And I would want to know, do you agree? And how would you discern them?
Well, provided, let me think here. It really depends. Again, we get reaction all the time from people because the subconscious brain is so much faster and it knows everything. It's your database. It's your collection of behaviors, emotions, agendas, beliefs, and it uses those components to interpret. So it's far beyond just the language that's used. It's all of these other elements that your brain is incorporating from its programs to figure out what you mean or make sense of this scenario in front of me. Just take the person that you've just gotten yelled at your boss because somebody under you screwed up a project. And you've just gotten leveled by your boss. Now, as a manager, how are you going to go deal with the employee? Think about the emotion that's driving you.
Not right away.
What's that?
I said I would not do it right away.
You would not do it right away because
I would not do it. I wouldn't even let them know anything was up. I would steer clear. I would completely avoid until I had my own self under control.
Okay, and now that you got yourself under control, what would you say to your employee? They really screwed up this project. What would you say? Would you tell them they really screwed up this project?
In a manner of speaking, I think I would. I think it would be, honestly, I think it would depend on the employee and their perspective. If it's somebody I could say, dude, this really got screwed up and we got to figure out how this doesn't happen again. Because in my mind, if it's my employee and my boss came to me, I need to stop it there. So I don't want to take it out on my employee. I do want to make it a learning experience for them to make us both better.
Right. So what language does one use? Hey, you really screwed that up. We got to fix it.
Yeah, no.
Okay. Well, there's an example of emotion and automatic function occurring because the emotion driving from the prior discussion with the boss. Okay. The difference between a manager and a leader is one that understands these gaps. The leader turns around and says, well, and it's really about understanding how nonverbal, non-communicative efforts cause people to react. Let me give you an example of what I might say in this scenario is that, well, we really didn't get a good result from your efforts on this project. Would you mind sitting down with me, showing me what you did, and maybe we can come up with some new ideas? What do you think?
Everybody, rewind this.
Now, what
listen
you'll
to it,
notice
write it
is
down.
that there's no judgment here. We're not blaming them, but we're putting fault where fault is due by using we didn't get a good result from your efforts. It doesn't create the emotional stigma that you really screwed this up.
Right.
Creates. And these are how we use reframing techniques to get people to participate and create engagement. And we also use permission-based structures. One of the most important things I teach is the more we use permission, the more people are apt to participate. The more, because there's no reciprocity, there's no downside of saying no. So the willingness on the other side becomes much stronger and much more participatory.
Isn't that interesting? I was listening to a podcast this morning as I was on a walk, and that was actually, they said it in a different way, and they were applying it to a different scenario, and it fits here. When we go out and we're looking for an answer, when we are willing, we will find the people that are willing to meet us.
Provided our language is such that engages them in that dialogue.
And so we could shorten the amount of no's we get to a yes, is what I hear you saying.
Well, we can by asking the right questions.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I see so many people in sales environments where they'll go in and they'll just ask blatant questions, and they're very forthcoming and very throw it out there. Well, tell me more about what you're doing. Tell me what you want to accomplish. Tell me and how does that feel? Tell me this, tell me that. How do those things feel?
They're invasive.
I'm sorry?
Invasive. I don't like to be told to tell.
Well, and so a little known observation that I've made over the years in teaching is that we've been brought up to tell people who we are, what we do, how well we do it. Our egos manifest that and blatantly throw it out there. But when we tell, some psychological level of resistance is stimulated. Telling is a form of a psychological form of imposition. Let me tell you how to do that better.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? Mm-hmm. And when we start down that road, we're stimulating emotions that have nothing to do with the conversation at hand, but they take over the conversation at hand.
Oh, you're going to be so proud of me, okay? Because even just today, and I'm going to use this in relationship to my son again first, because it was the most recent thing. But it's very profound because the reaction I got was very different than every other reaction I've ever gotten, right? He's 6. And of course I know more. I've been around a whole lot more. And every once in a while, I tell him that. Most of the time, though, when he tells me something or something didn't go right, I immediately have a solution. I'm like, oh, okay, because I have been conditioned to help, to step up, to help. And today, which, by the way, I'm not particularly fond of, and that's a habit that I am working on changing. So in action then today, we're walking to school and he tells me something and he's telling me this thing. And I started to say something and then I caught myself and I said, that sounds like it's something you've got to think about. Would you like to hear what I have to say about it? And he said, no. I said, okay. And we went on our way. And that was the end of the conversation. But the fact that he, and what's interesting is we seem to be afraid to have those types of conversations with other adults. We seem to want to impose ourselves. We're worth it. We know, whichever camp we happen to be in from our experience, instead of going, oh, would you like an idea about that?
Well, even further, you can say, may I share?
Yeah.
Some ideas.
Mm-hmm.
Because would you like still might be felt as you're imposing what you want to impose on me.
Yep.
May I share? Well, maybe you can share.
Yeah.
It's all a question of framing and perception of what does someone hear you saying and how are they going to respond or react to what they're hearing.
Okay. So everybody who's listening, this is just a little dialogue, and this is how our learning happens is, look, I had this revelation. Ooh, I can apply that. And there's a way I can do more to get where I want to go. And that's what I hear you saying, Ralph, is through this practice, through this concept of making it an area of study, of something that we become trained in by somebody like you that has this awareness and this little tuner that goes, oh yeah, here we are. Or yeah, no, that's really not where you want to be. I hear where you want to be. So here we go together. I love that we can continue to work and see, because we might think we got past a trigger and it shows up in a totally different way and we're still triggered by it. So we get to practice and find ourselves in situations, and how are we responding? How is somebody else responding? Are we getting what we want? Which usually comes down to connection. It's not always a yes, can I get a yes? Can I get a yes? It's, are we connected in a way that we can build something together to get to a sale, to get to a relationship, to get to a finish line?
Well, you talk about getting to sales and getting to relationships, and realistically, it's all about the relationship. It's never about the sale.
Always.
The sale is only a component that the relationship affords.
Mm-hmm.
The question is, how does one create a relationship with someone that didn't come for a relationship? Remember,
right.
The professional's agenda to create the relationship, not the consumer's. The consumer has an agenda of buying what they came to buy and getting out.
Mm-hmm.
Develop a lifelong friendship.
Right.
It's language that we use that causes people to behave and to categorize and compartmentalize us the way they do through labeling. It's again how the brain stores information. The more I see you as a person, the only way I see you as a person is if you use language that other people use to me, not other salespeople use to me.
Mm-hmm.
If you use language that other salespeople use to me in my presence, you become the sum of a salesperson. And my behaviors surrounding all salespeople will behave that way in your presence. It's just like if you go to a party and you meet someone drunk and unruly and loud and obnoxious. Did you have a good time around that person?
No.
Not a bit. And let's look at the impression and the program pattern that person made in your brain. You forget about this incident. 5-6 weeks go by, 2 months go by. You're at another party and you're having a wonderful time. And then one of your friends came over and said, oh, Charlie's coming over. And Charlie's the guy that was obnoxious and rude and everything. What happens to your disposition, even though Charlie's not even in the room? And how does it affect all of your friends now?
Exactly.
A wonderful time with.
Right.
So remember, the brain has patterns. It recognizes things. The way I look at things, we want things to change. Change happens in the subconscious mind. It happens, in my opinion, only in one way. And that's being given information in a receptive mind state. When one is not in a receptive mind state, I believe that most of the information is discarded. The existing belief systems stay intact, and nothing will change. But when you give me permission to engage you in information, and not to say that once I ask for permission once, I have it throughout our dialogue, I have to continually ask whether or not you're still engaged, whether you still want more of what I have to share, or I shouldn't be sharing because you're only going to throw it away anyway.
Interesting. So, and these are little questions. May I ask you another question?
Absolutely.
You heard it here first, ladies and gentlemen. That was in action. Oh, Ralph, I have so much fun talking to you. I have so much fun talking to you. So we are going to go to the next question, which is, what can we do to discern the words somebody else uses? Because we can hear that they're saying something. We're pretty sure they're asking us a different question. How can we get to the real question that they want an answer to?
Do you want to give me an example?
Well, what came to mind was the pen example that we did together.
Well, I don't know that we can do it here, but realistically, the concept is understanding difference between need and want. What I find is that most people don't know what they need to solve the problem. They only know what they want. They want a solution to their problem. When one doesn't ask qualifying questions, then one falls victim to perception of inadequacy based on lack of communication. Now, the example you use is, I demonstrated this with Jessica in person, but this is a device. Let's say I walk into your store. You own the store. This is a piece of your inventory that I've taken from the shelf. And I walk over and I hand it on the counter. You let me hold it up for you. You can see what it is. Okay. And I say, I want to buy that. How much is it? Well, the typical sales clerk or salesperson, they're going to give me a price, $1.29, whatever it is. And I'm going to walk out of the store happy with what I purchased, and I'm going to take it home, and I try and water my plants with it because for some reason I thought this was the device I needed to water my plants. What am I going to say about the saleswoman who sold it to me?
Nothing nice.
Why?
Because pens don't water plants.
Well, but how was it her fault?
It was
never her fault.
It was never her fault. However,
my stupidity, my lack of knowledge, my ignorance, thinking that this was the device I needed to solve my problem, was mistaken. But when I took it home and I tried to apply it, I found it didn't work. And my disappointment and my frustration, well, gee, again, how did it become her fault?
Oh, that could be a whole other conversation. I have this experience of, you know what? Just because I'm angry doesn't mean I have to be angry at somebody. I can just
it's a lot deeper than
most people are angry at somebody. We feel like we have to put our emotions someplace else.
Well, it's a lot deeper. The subconscious mind serves two purposes. Its primary purpose is to take instructions from the conscious mind. Its secondary purpose is to protect you at all costs. So it's going to look to push blame whenever it can push blame, not to feel the impacts of its own stupidity. And that's the way it works. So it's got to be your fault. That stupid woman sold me a gosh darn thing that doesn't work, and I'm never going back there again. Matter of fact, I'm telling 20 of my friends never to go back there too. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Now we have the sales professional who's actually been trained in qualifying information. And when I come up and I say, I want to buy this, how much is it? He turns and asks a qualifying question. But now there are questions and there are questions. Well, gee, what are you going to use it for? Well, how does that feel? It's a pen. Would that feel somewhat stupid for a question?
It would, yes.
It's a good question, but yet it's insulting from a perspective. So that's not a good question to ask. So we need a different qualifying question, one that will disclose a usage. One might be, well, are you aware it comes in red, green, and blue ink? What color ink would you like? Hopefully, a conversation about ink would manifest a conversation about watering plants, in which case I would know that this is not the right device. We can also ask a different qualifying question that's not insulting and intelligent, and is, may I ask what type of writing style you have? Perhaps we have a better device for you. Okay, and again, should disclose, well, I don't want a writing device, I want a watering can. Mm-hmm. Okay, now again, once I know what the qualification is, once I know what the application is, I can say, well, gee, this won't work. And again, immediately go back in your face with, well, gee, you must have been dumb for asking this. How have I made you feel? What's the likeliness you're going to buy anything from this guy? Mm-hmm. But the intelligent person doesn't look to push blame, doesn't look to find fault, and doesn't look to create some inadequacy. He goes the broad scale, and this actually requires thinking beyond the normal scope. And my response would be, well, are you aware we haven't had good success with this device in that application? May I share with you what I use to water my plants? In which case, What I've said is that I've implied I tried it and it didn't work for me either. So you see how I've aligned myself with the client's needs and how I've aligned myself with language where he didn't feel offended on any level, and he went home with a watering can. What's he going to say about the salesman that sold him the watering can?
Wow. Invite them to dinner, name their first kid, and maybe their next pet right after them. Who knows?
Well, maybe not that extreme, but I think you see the point is that qualifying questions, asking questions in a format that creates engagement and receptivity rather than defensiveness or imposition are the keys to a successful transaction. And not only transaction in sales, transaction with your children, your spouse, your partners, what have you. It all depends. Do you have a forward-looking view of what behaviors and emotions you want to manifest in the conversation you're having now?
And so every conversation can be somewhat of an experiment to reinforce what we think we have grasped, and then being able to look back at it to know, did our intention come across the way that we wanted it to? And what will we try next time?
Well,
so this seems to be an ongoing practice.
Well, yes, it is. You have to be more aware because, let me back up here by saying that the conscious brain does one thing. It gives instructions. That's all it really does. It gives instructions, about 50 to 60,000 instructions a day. Once it gives an instruction, it's the subconscious mind that puts all the pieces together, pulls up all of its tools to figure out what dexterity, mobility, visualization, audible tools I need to fulfill that request. Mm-hmm. But the subconscious brain is a true multitasker and the conscious brain is not. The conscious brain can only give one instruction at a time. And it can give a lot of them, but only one at a time. The subconscious brain can do millions of things at the same time. And a test that they've done recently to show the speed of the subconscious brain and its automatic functions, which are, again, everything you do in the outside world is done from your subconscious, not your conscious. It's only directed from your conscious. And it took the fastest supercomputer in the world an amazing 40 minutes to process 1 second of human brain activity. That's all of the things your brain is doing every second. It took that big computer 40 minutes. That's how fast your brain is working. That's how fast your automatic functions are working. And your conscious mind, not so fast. So it does take a concerted effort to be aware of the now. If you're not in the now, you're not listening. You're already thinking about what you're going to say next without ever listening to what's coming in. And that's how these mistakes are made. I like asking 3 questions in the sales process that I call landmine disclosure. You talked about landmines earlier, so I thought that I might bring this up.
Cool.
And there are 3 primary questions I like to ask of my clients before I engage them in much of anything. Because I have to know other elements that have nothing to do with my sales process in order to be able to complete a sales process. And the elements I need to know are how they feel about salespeople, how they've been treated in the past, what kind of experiences do they think they're going to see through me, and whether or not I can alter those so that they see something else, me, rather than the past 20 people that they've seen. So the 3 landmine questions I'm going to share with you today are, well, have you ever worked with a professional like myself before? That's the first question. And I'm actually going to break it down for you if I have time to do so.
Please.
I want to know how they see me, through what eyes, what label they're placing me on. So I'm not going to ask them if they've ever worked with a trainer before or an educator or a marketer. I'm not going to put a label on myself for them to label me, which will then manifest a characteristic behavior around that label that they have. I want to know what they see. They can answer that question one of 3 ways. Yes, no, or what kind of a professional are you? Well, yes tells me they've labeled me. No tells me that they had limited or no experience in my expertise, and I have creative license. And what kind of a professional are you tells me that they're open to seeing who I am rather than already classing me as somebody else. And they're already prepared to deal with that somebody else instead of looking at me through open eyes. The next question I like to ask, of course, is, may I ask what those experiences were like? Those are the landmines. Oh, he did a great job for me, but, I could never get him on the phone. And when it came to support, they just weren't up to what well, now I know all of my brownie points. I know where I have to take this conversation. They weren't getting phone calls through. Gee, well, were you aware that I give you my cell phone number? Anytime you ever have a call, you call me directly. Never mind those 800 numbers. Never mind the offices. You make them a friend. You tie them to you through that dialogue by learning where their gaps are and basically telling you what they're looking for in dealing with another professional. And the last question I always like to ask is, well, gee, have you tried to work it out with these folks, or are you looking for some alternatives or options? You want them to tell you that they're looking for alternatives or options.
Got it.
By asking them if they have, if they've gone back and why they haven't gone back, is also giving you fuel, but you really want them only to answer the second part of that question. Because if I tell you you're looking for alternatives or options, whose idea is it?
Yours, not
and
mine.
How reluctant are you going to be to my ideas, especially if you categorized me as one of those people?
Exactly.
So you see, there are many, many things going on in a client's mind before they ever even walked in your office, before you ever opened up the door. There are behaviors that are manifesting that are working against you as a sales professional only because of perceptions of the fact that you're a sales professional and you're here to sell me something. Now, the true sales professional, he asks these questions, and he also goes into it understanding that communications is a three-part series. We have manipulation, which is unethical, inappropriate, and overused by sales professionals. It's why sales professionals have a bad name, why car salesmen have a bad name, because manipulation was a key factor in the selling process. We have intentional guidance. Intentional guidance is essentially to your best interest at my sacrifice. Well, I can do that job for you, but I'm really terrible at those tasks. Let me introduce you to my friend over here, Charlie, that does it for me. He'll do a better job for less money. You sacrifice yourself to maintain your integrity and your trust with your client by giving them the right tool rather than trying to do a half-act job without accomplishing much. And then the third is intentional influences, which is what we go for. Is we identify the actual need, we identify the actual solution to the need, and we see whether or not ours fits, and provided it does, we integrate it so that they see the solution through that process, and then we both win. So I believe that sales is all about not selling, but solution providing. I believe that sales is all about introducing someone to what they don't know, so that they can make informed, intelligent decisions, and then to help them make decisions through the language and the questions you use. So it's all their idea, and it's the right idea, and it's the proper solution at the end of the day.
All right, you heard it here. This is one that is so action-packed and information-rich that every time I hear it, which by the way, I've heard a lot of this stuff through our conversations, and I pick up something new every time. Save this program, keep it as a reference point, because everything that we can use our brain for, everything that we want to get in this life, everything that we want others to get from us in this life starts with communication, and that communication starts with us. You'll find all the program notes for the language of listening at voiceofboldbusiness.com/P97. That is voiceofboldbusiness.com/P for program 97. You can also search the language of listening. You've listened, you've watched, share a comment, rate this program. Let us know what you think, because it's your experience and your experience and your experience and all of our experiences and our beliefs that define what it means to lead today. Problem solving comes from thinking about what our business initiatives are, what our role is to get there, and the language we're using to pave the way. Practice the language of listening.
Subscribe at thevoiceofboldbusiness.com and get more information, program notes, and past episodes. Bold leaders approach each situation and focus on action to achieve a higher level of leadership. Jessica Dewell, your business advocate, is the host of the Voice of Bold Business Radio. Thank you for joining us.